If you've ever wondered what happens when a woman pushed too far finally stops pretending to listen closely, they thought my silence meant submission. They mistook my patience for weakness. At that rehearsal dinner in Charleston, while my father-in-law mocked my dress and my husband laughed along, something inside me shattered. Not my spirit, no. That crystallized into something harder than diamond. By the time I slipped off my wedding ring that night and placed it on the nightstand, I'd already decided the joke was about to be on them. My name is Claire Donovan, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a marketing analyst at a mid-sized firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. That's exactly how I've always preferred it. I built my career from scratch. No family connections, no trust fund padding my bank account. Every promotion, every achievement came from late nights studying market trends and early mornings perfecting presentations. My colleagues respect me for my insights, not my last name. I married Ethan Donovan 3 years ago, back when I still believed love could bridge any gap. He's 36, charming in that effortless way that comes from never having to truly struggle. We met at a conference in Charlotte he was presenting on commercial real estate development, and I was analyzing consumer behavior patterns. He pursued me with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no. I should have recognized that as a warning sign. The Donovans of Charleston are what you'd call old money, or at least they project that image with practiced precision. Gregory Donovan, my father-in-law, carries himself like he owns every room he enters. His gray hair is always perfectly styled, his suits hand-tailored, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that only comes from a lifetime of looking down on others. He built Donovan Enterprises on what he calls strategic partnerships, but what I've come to understand as leveraged debt and smoke and mirrors accounting. My mother-in-law, Elaine, is subtler in her cruelty. She smiles while delivering backhanded compliments, her perfectly manicured nails drumming on tables when she's displeased. "Oh, Claire, how practical of you to shop at outlet stores," she'd say, examining my clothes like a scientist studying bacteria. Not everyone can pull off designer pieces anyway. From the beginning, I was the outsider. At my first Donovan family dinner, Gregory asked about my family background. When I mentioned my parents were teachers and my father now worked at a hardware store after the school district's budget cuts, I watched something shift in his eyes. I became categorized, filed away as beneath them. Every family gathering since has been an exercise in endurance weathering jokes about my quaint upbringing, my creative approach to fashion, my ambitious career goals that they found amusing for someone of my station. What they don't know, what even Ethan doesn't fully grasp, is that 2 years ago, my great-aunt Margaret passed away. Aunt Margaret, who everyone in my family dismissed as the eccentric spinster who lived alone with her cats in Asheville. Aunt Margaret, who spent 50 years quietly building a real estate empire across 7 states. The reading of her will was private. Just me and her attorney in a small office overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. She left me everything $74 million in commercial properties, retail spaces, and apartment complexes. The portfolio generates nearly $6 million in annual revenue. I haven't told anyone the full extent of it, not out of shame or fear, but because Aunt Margaret taught me something valuable in the few times we met. "Never show your cards, Claire," she'd said, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Let them underestimate you. Their blindness is your advantage." So I continue driving my 5-year-old Honda Accord. I shop sales and clip coupons. I smile politely when Gregory makes another joke about Ethan being the breadwinner. I nod when Elaine suggests I should be grateful Ethan chose me despite our differences. And Ethan. He shifts uncomfortably but never speaks up. His silence has become louder than their words. The storm has been building for 3 years. Every dismissed concern, every moment Ethan chose his family's approval over my dignity, every time I bit my tongue instead of revealing the truth, it's all been accumulating like pressure in a volcano. They see my professional wardrobe from department stores and assume poverty. They hear my measured responses and assume weakness. They watch me endure their contempt and assume I have nowhere else to go. They're about to learn how wrong they've been. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Magnolia Room in Charleston's historic district. All exposed brick and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where old Southern money comes to celebrate itself. Ethan's cousin Victoria was marrying into another prominent family, and the Donovans were in full peacock mode. I'd spent hours selecting my outfit, a dark green dress I'd found at a consignment shop in Raleigh. It was actually vintage Halston, though the label had been removed by a previous owner. The cut was timeless, the fabric expensive, falling perfectly against my frame. I'd paired it with simple pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. I felt confident walking in, my hand in Ethan's, the silk whispering against my legs. The room smelled of gardenias and expensive perfume, the soft clink of champagne glasses creating a symphony of privilege. We were seated at the family table, of course, right where Gregory could hold court. The first course hadn't even arrived when it started. "Claire," Gregory's voice boomed across the table, drawing attention from nearby guests. "That's an interesting color choice." He studied me over his wine glass, his eyes already glassy from the pre-dinner cocktails. "Very forest. Or is it more military surplus?" The table tittered. Elaine touched her diamond necklace, a gesture she made when she was about to pile on. "It's brave of you, dear, wearing such a difficult color. Not everyone can afford to have their colors done professionally." I kept my posture straight, cutting my salad with precise movements. "I've always liked green." "Yes, well," Gregory continued, his voice carrying that false joviality that preceded his worst behavior. "It certainly looks like something from a clearance rack. What was it? End of season 70% off." The laughter rippled around the table. Victoria's mother leaned forward, her eyes bright with malicious curiosity. Ethan's cousin Marcus actually pulled out his phone, as if this humiliation was worth recording. And Ethan. He sat beside me, his jaw working, his eyes fixed on his water glass. "Gregory," I said quietly, "I chose this dress because it was affordable," Gregory interrupted, slapping the table. "Nothing wrong with bargain hunting." "Right. Ethan, your wife's thriftiness must be such an asset. Balances out your expensive taste." This was Ethan's moment. His wife was being humiliated in front of 40 guests, her appearance mocked by his own father. I felt his hand on my knee under the table, not in support, but in warning. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass the family. Then I heard it. A chuckle. Low, uncomfortable, but unmistakable. Ethan was laughing, not defending me, not even staying silent, but actually laughing along with his father's cruelty. "Dad's got a point," Ethan said, his voice strained but playing along. "Claire's always been practical about fashion." The word practical hung in the air like a slap. The table erupted in knowing laughter, the kind that follows when someone has been successfully put in their place. I felt heat rise from my chest to my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice. I excused myself to the ladies' room, walking steadily despite the trembling in my hands. The bathroom was all marble and gold fixtures, empty except for my reflection. The dress looked beautiful, actually. The color brought out my eyes, the cut flattered my figure, but all they saw was my presumed poverty, my outsider status, my unworthiness of their name. I gripped the marble counter, watching my knuckles go white. In that moment, looking at myself surrounded by luxury that reeked of debt and pretense, I made a decision. They wanted to laugh at the woman in the clearance rack dress. They had no idea that this woman owned more real estate than everyone at that table combined. They had no idea that their castle was built on sand, and I had the tide charts. When I returned to the table, I was calm. I ate my dinner, smiled at the appropriate moments, even toasted the happy couple. But something fundamental had shifted. Every laugh, every smirk, every knowing glance was being catalogued. Ethan reached for my hand during dessert, perhaps sensing the change, but I pulled away to reach for my water. "Everything all right, darling?" he whispered. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd vowed to honor and protect me, who'd just laughed while his father tore me down in public. "Perfect," I said, and meant it, because for the first time in 3 years, everything was crystal clear. The reception the next evening was even more elaborate, a converted plantation house with string lights threading through ancient oaks, a jazz quartet playing beneath the stars. I'd chosen a different dress, navy blue, simple but elegant. I'd learned my lesson about trying too hard for these people. But Gregory hadn't finished with me. The cocktail hour was in full swing when it happened. I stood near the bar, waiting for a glass of wine, when Gregory's voice carried across the crowd. He was holding court with a group of his business associates, men in identical suits with identical smirks. "That's my daughter-in-law over there," he said, pointing at me with his whiskey glass. "Claire. Ethan married down, at least she's thrifty." The eruption of laughter felt like a physical blow. People turned to look at me, some with pity, others with amusement. One woman actually whispered behind her hand to her companion. I stood there, wine glass trembling in my hand, feeling like a specimen pinned to a board for examination. Ethan was across the room, talking to Victoria's new husband. He heard the laughter, saw the group looking my way. Our eyes met across the space. This was his second chance, his opportunity to finally stand up for me, for us, for our marriage. He walked over to his father's group. My heart lifted for a moment finally. Finally, he would defend me. "Dad," Ethan said, and I held my breath. Gregory clapped him on the shoulder. "Just telling the boys here about Claire's economical approach to life. Nothing wrong with marrying a sensible woman, even if she doesn't quite fit the Donovan standard." Ethan's face went red. He glanced at me, then at the expectant faces of his father's friends. And then, God help me, he laughed. Not just a nervous chuckle this time, but a full laugh, the kind meant to show he was in on the joke. "Well, someone has to keep me grounded," he said, raising his glass in mock toast. The group roared its approval. Gregory beamed at his son, proud that Ethan had chosen family loyalty over his wife's dignity. Again. I set down my wine glass and walked toward the French doors leading to the garden. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step measured and deliberate. Behind me, I heard Elaine's voice. She's sensitive. Not everyone can handle Donovan humor. The garden was quieter, moonlight filtering through Spanish moss. I found a stone bench near a fountain and sat, not caring if the moisture ruined my dress. My hands were steady now, the trembling replaced by something harder, colder. I caught my reflection in the fountain's surface, distorted by ripples but still recognizable. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who'd walked into that rehearsal dinner. That woman had still harbored hope that Ethan might change, might someday choose her over his family's approval. This woman knew better. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Where are you? Dad wants to take a family photo." A family photo. After what just happened, he wanted me to smile beside the people who'd just humiliated me, stand there like a good wife, pretend the laughter hadn't happened, pretend his betrayal hadn't cut deeper than any insult his father could devise. I stood, smoothing my dress, and walked back inside. I stood for the photo, smiled at the camera, played my part perfectly. But inside, something irreversible had occurred. The marriage I'd thought I had built on love, mutual respect, partnership had revealed itself as an illusion. I was an accessory to Ethan, a prop in the Donovan family performance, expected to absorb their contempt with grace. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I danced when expected, made small talk when approached, even shared a dance with Gregory where he whispered, "Don't take things so personally, dear. It's just how we are." Just how they are. Cruel, dismissive, entitled. When we finally returned to our hotel room at 11:45 that night, Ethan was slightly drunk, loosening his tie with relief. That went well, he said, oblivious to my silence. Dad really liked the toast I gave. I watched him prepare for bed, this stranger I'd married. He hummed while brushing his teeth, checked his phone for messages, completely unaware that our marriage had ended hours ago in a room full of laughter. When he finally fell asleep, snoring softly with his back to me, I sat up and looked at my wedding ring. 3 carats, princess cut. A Donovan family heirloom that Elaine had made clear was on loan to me. I slipped it off my finger. It came off easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment. I placed it on the nightstand with a soft click. In the darkness, without that ring, my hand felt lighter, free. Tomorrow, I would begin to show them exactly who they'd been laughing at. 2 years earlier, I sat in a small law office in Asheville, my hands folded in my lap as Thomas Brennan, my great-aunt Margaret's attorney, shuffled through papers. The office smelled of old leather and coffee, rain pattering against the windows. I'd driven up that morning, expecting maybe a few $1,000s and some antique furniture. "Miss Clare," Thomas said, his voice gentle. "Margaret spoke of you often. She was very particular about who would inherit her estate." He slid a folder across the mahogany desk. I opened it, and the number at the bottom of the page didn't make sense. I counted the digits twice. 74 million, my voice came out as a whisper. In total assets, yes. The Donovan Heights portfolio. He paused, smiling at the coincidence of the name. She named it that 40 years ago, long before you became a Donovan yourself. It includes 43 commercial properties, 16 apartment complexes, and 8 retail centers across 7 states. My Aunt Margaret had been the family's mystery, the unmarried sister who'd moved south in the 70s and rarely visited. At family reunions, she'd sit apart, observing, occasionally calling me over to share observations that seemed random at the time but now felt prophetic. "So she built this herself?" I asked, flipping through property deeds, rental agreements, financial statements showing steady profits year after year. Every bit of it. Started with one small apartment building in 1978. She had a gift for seeing potential where others saw decay. Buy low, renovate smart, never sell. The portfolio generates approximately $6 million in annual revenue, all professionally managed. You won't have to do anything except decide what to do with the profits. I remembered my last conversation with Aunt Margaret, 3 months before she died. I'd visited her after a particularly brutal Donovan family dinner where Gregory had spent the entire evening explaining why people like us could never truly understand business like people like them. "They mock you," she'd said, her eyes sharp despite her frail body. "That husband's family of yours." "It's fine," I'd lied. "No, it's not. But it will be." She'd gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I've watched you. Claire, you have my patience, my ability to wait. Don't correct fools when they call you poor. Don't show them your cards when they mock your clothes. Let them think they're superior. Their blindness is your armor, their arrogance your weapon." "I don't understand." "You will. When the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do. The powerful are most vulnerable when they feel most secure. Remember that." Now, sitting in Thomas's office, her words made perfect sense. She'd given me more than money, she'd given me invisible power. "There's one more thing," Thomas said, pulling out another document. "Margaret was very specific about this. She's arranged for complete privacy regarding the inheritance. No public records, everything held in trust. Your name appears nowhere except on documents only you and I can access. She said you'd know when to reveal it, if ever. She knew I'd keep it secret. She counted on it. She also left you this." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name in her spidery handwriting. I opened it in my car, rain drumming on the roof. "Claire, they laugh at you now because they think you're weak. Good. The weak pose no threat. The poor deserve no respect. The outsider warrants no fear. But you're none of those things, are you? You're a Brennan woman, and we've always known how to play the long game. Your husband's family built their castle on credit and ego. You now own an empire built on solid ground and patience. Don't rush to use it. Let them continue their performance. But when they finally push too far, and they will, people like that always do remember that you hold real power, not the illusion of it. Make me proud, all my love, Margaret. I'd folded the letter and kept it in my jewelry box. Hidden beneath items Elaine would never deign to touch costume jewelry from my college days. My mother's old watch, things that marked me as less than in their eyes. For 2 years, I'd played my role perfectly. I'd clipped coupons while my checking account held millions. I'd endured Elaine's suggestions about discount stores while owning properties that would make her weep with envy. I'd let Gregory mock my career while my passive income dwarfed his supposed fortune. But that night in Charleston, as Ethan laughed at his father's cruelty, Aunt Margaret's words echoed in my mind. When they finally pushed too far, they had pushed too far. The time for patience was over. The long game was about to end, and they had no idea they'd already lost. The Monday after Charleston, I sat across from Daniel Mercer in his corner office overlooking downtown Raleigh. Daniel had been managing Aunt Margaret's portfolio, now mine, with the kind of discretion that only old money lawyers perfect. He was 62, silver-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. "Claire," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "you've been patient for 2 years. What's changed?" I placed a folder on his desk. "I need you to run a comprehensive financial analysis on Donovan Enterprises. Everything their loans, liens, investor agreements, property holdings, debt structure." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's your husband's family business." "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, then opened the folder. "This kind of investigation isn't cheap. I'm not concerned about the cost. I want to know every financial vulnerability they have." Daniel made notes in his legal pad, his fountain pen scratching against paper. "May I ask why?" "Let's call it due diligence." A week later, Daniel called me to his office. The report he'd compiled was devastating in its thoroughness. Donovan Enterprises was exactly what I'd suspected, a house of cards built on leveraged debt and personal guarantees. "Gregory Donovan is essentially running a shell game," Daniel explained, spreading documents across his conference table. "He's borrowed against inflated property values, used those loans to secure other loans, created a web of debt that only works if property values keep rising and tenants keep paying. And if someone called in those loans, the entire structure would collapse within 30 days. I traced my finger along a property list. Who holds the primary notes? Various banks and private lenders. But here's the interesting part. He pulled out another sheet. Many of these loans have been packaged and sold on the secondary market. They're available for purchase, if you know where to look. How much to buy controlling interest in his debt? Daniel did quick calculations. Roughly $12 million would give you control of $40 million in loans. You'd essentially own his company's financial future. Do it." He paused. "Claire, this is your husband's family." "My husband," I said carefully, "laughed while his father humiliated me in front of 50 people. His family has made it clear I'm an outsider, a burden they tolerate. I'm simply going to show them what this particular burden is capable of." Daniel nodded slowly. "It'll take about 2 weeks to quietly acquire the positions without raising alarms. I'll need to use shell companies, work through intermediaries." "Perfect. And Daniel, I want you to time the acquisition so we can call everything due simultaneously. Maximum impact." "That would destroy them." "No," I corrected. "It will give me control. What I do with that control depends entirely on them." Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained my normal routine. I went to work, attended a Donovan family dinner where Gregory made 3 jokes about my Toyota Camry, sat through Elaine's monologue about the importance of marrying within one's station. Ethan noticed my quietness but attributed it to menstruation, actually saying, "You're always moody during your time of the month." Meanwhile, Daniel worked with the precision of a surgeon. He created 3 shell companies, each purchasing different portions of Donovan Enterprises' debt. The beautiful irony was that we used the profits from my real estate portfolio, the Donovan Heights properties, to buy the debt that would bring down the Donovans themselves. It's done, Daniel told me on a Thursday afternoon at 3:15. You now control 63% of Donovan Enterprises' outstanding debt. The call provisions allow you to demand full payment with 72 hours' notice. What about their personal assets? Gregory personally guaranteed most of these loans. His house, his cars, even Elaine's jewelry are all collateral. If the company can't pay, he loses everything. I stood at Daniel's window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Gregory was probably bullying a contractor or humiliating a waiter. Ethan was likely at his desk, checking his portfolio, never imagining his wife owned the ground beneath his feet. Draw up the call notices, I said, but don't send them yet. When? I'll tell you when. I want the timing to be perfect. Daniel stood beside me. You know, Margaret would be proud. She always said you had steel in your spine, just waiting for the right moment to show it. She saw me, I said quietly. Really saw me. Not the discount dress or the modest car or the middle-class background. She saw what I could become. And what's that? I turned from the window, my reflection in the glass showing someone I barely recognized, someone harder, sharper, transformed by betrayal into something dangerous. Their reckoning! The morning after everything was in place. I stood on my hotel balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor. I'd told Ethan I needed to stay an extra day to handle a work emergency. He'd barely looked up from his laptop, waving me off with a distracted goodbye. The sunrise painted the water gold and crimson, peaceful before the storm I was about to unleash. At exactly 9 o'clock, I called Daniel from my cell phone. Execute the calls, I said simply. All of them. Every single one. 72 hours notice as per the loan terms. Claire, once I do this, I know, do it. I heard him typing, the soft click of keys that would shatter the Donovan empire. Notices will be delivered simultaneously at 9:30 a.m. Electronic copies to their attorneys. Hard copies by courier to both the office and Gregory's home. Perfect. I spent the next hour sitting in peaceful silence, drinking coffee from the hotel's fine china, watching sailboats drift across the harbor. My phone began buzzing at 9:43 p.m. First, a text from Ethan. What the hell is happening? Then a call from Gregory. I let it go to voicemail. Another from Elaine ignored. By 10:15 a.m., my phone had logged 17 missed calls. I turned it off entirely and went for a walk along the harbor, breathing salt air, feeling lighter with each step. The panic must have been glorious. I imagined Gregory in his corner office, his face purple with rage as he read notice after notice. $40 million due in 72 hours. His lawyers scrambling, making calls, discovering that some unknown entity had bought up everything. His banking relationships suddenly worthless, the debt had been sold, and the new creditor had every legal right to call it due. I knew from Daniel's research that Donovan Enterprises had less than $3 million in liquid assets. The rest was tied up in properties already leveraged to their maximum value. Gregory would need to liquidate everything, and even that wouldn't be enough. At 2:30 p.m., I turned my phone back on to find 47 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic texts from Ethan. Dad's loans have been called. Someone bought all our debt. The lawyers say we have 3 days. Where are you? This is destroying everything. Call me now. I ordered room service lobster bisque and a glass of champagne and watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The hotel phone rang at 4 o'clock p.m. I'd been expecting it. Mrs. Donovan. The concierge's voice was carefully neutral. There's a Mr. Gregory Donovan in the lobby. He's quite insistent about seeing you. Send him up. 5 minutes later, Gregory stood in my doorway. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, his face haggard. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 7 hours. You, he breathed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and rage. It was you! I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Would you like some coffee, Gregory? You look tired. How? He stumbled to the sofa, collapsing into it. How could you possibly? The same way I afforded this suite. The same way I could have afforded designer dresses and luxury cars, and all the things you mocked me for not having. I poured myself more champagne, taking my time. I chose not to. That's impossible. We investigated Ethan's girlfriend before the wedding. You're nobody. Your family has nothing. My family has teachers and hardware store workers and nurses, good, honest people who work for their living. But you're right. They don't have money. I sat across from him, crossing my legs. My great-aunt Margaret, on the other hand, had $74 million in real estate holdings. She left them all to me. His face went white. You've been pretending. To be poor, no, Gregory. I've been choosing to live modestly. There's a difference. You've been pretending to be wealthy while drowning in debt. Pretending to be superior while building your castle on quicksand. What do you want? His voice cracked. Money. More money. I have money. What I want is something you can't give me the last 3 years back, without the humiliation, without the jokes, without watching my husband choose your cruelty over my dignity. This will destroy Ethan too, he said desperately. Your own husband. The husband who laughed while you called me bargain basement trash. The husband who never once defended me. That husband. I stood, walking to the window. He made his choice in that ballroom. Now I've made mine. Gregory's phone rang his lawyer. No doubt. As he answered it, his face growing paler with each word, I watched the harbor lights begin to twinkle in the growing dusk. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably discovering that his wife, the one he'd dismissed, marginalized, allowed to be mocked, held his family's future in her manicured hands. The ones that had removed their wedding ring 3 nights ago and never put it back on. 3 days later, Gregory stood in my Raleigh apartment, a broken man. The doorman had called up, surprised to see him alone, without his usual entourage of assistants and sycophants. I let him wait in the lobby for 15 minutes before allowing him up. He looked around my modest 2-bedroom apartment, the same one I'd lived in since before marrying Ethan, the one Elaine had called quaint and temporary so many times. His eyes took in my second-hand furniture, my wall of books, the small kitchen where I'd cooked countless dinners while Ethan complained about not eating at restaurants. Coffee. I offered, pulling out a chipped mug from my cabinet, the same set Elaine had suggested I replace with something more appropriate for a Donovan wife. Gregory nodded mutely, slumping into my worn leather armchair. His hands shook as he accepted the mug. Gone was the commanding presence, the booming voice, the casual cruelty. He looked hollow. The lawyers have been through everything, he said quietly. You own it all. Every loan, every note, every personal guarantee. I sat across from him, my own coffee steaming between my hands. I know. Well, what did you do? His voice was genuinely confused. Some kind of insider trading corporate espionage. I laughed a real laugh, not the polite titter I'd perfected for Donovan gatherings. Nothing illegal, Gregory. I just stopped pretending I was powerless. I stood and walked to my bookshelf, pulling out a manila folder. From it, I removed document after document, laying them across my coffee table like playing cards. Property deeds, bank statements, financial reports, the entire Donovan Heights portfolio, spread out in devastating detail. $74 million in real estate assets, I said calmly. Annual revenue of $6 million. All mine. Inherited 2 years before I married your son. I've been wealthy this entire time. Gregory. Wealthier than you've ever been. He stared at the papers, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally, crushing comprehension. You let us mock you. Let us humiliate you. I let you reveal yourselves, I corrected. Every cruel joke, every dismissive comment, every time you made me feel small, you were showing me exactly who you were. people who would crush anyone they perceived as weak. But why hide it? My aunt taught me that invisible power is the strongest power. You never saw me as a threat because you never saw me as an equal. Your blindness was my advantage. The doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I opened it. Ethan stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect appearance was gone stubble. Wrinkled shirt, eyes red-rimmed. "Claire," he started, then saw his father. "Dad, what are you—" "Come in, Ethan." I stepped aside. We were just discussing the family business. Ethan entered slowly, looking between his father and me like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. His eyes fell on the documents spread across the table, and I watched him recognize the letterheads, the amounts, the signatures. "You," he turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the one who bought the debt." "Surprise," I said flatly. "The bargain basement wife has some money after all." But you drive a Camry. You shop at outlet stores. You clip coupons. By choice, not necessity. There's a difference between being frugal and being poor, though your family never bothered to learn it." Ethan sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "This is insane. You're my wife. We're married. You're destroying your own family." "No," I said sharply. "I'm destroying the Donovan empire. My family, my real family. They're teachers and nurses and hardware store workers who never once made me feel worthless for choosing a second-hand dress." "Claire, please," Gregory interrupted, his voice desperate. "There has to be something you want. Some deal we can make." I walked to my window, looking out at downtown Raleigh. From here, I could see 3 buildings I owned, though they'd never know it. "You want a deal?" "Yes, anything." I turned back to them, father and son, both reduced to begging in my modest apartment. "Full ownership transfer of Donovan Enterprises to me. You'll maintain your positions as employees with salaries I determine. Gregory, you'll write a public statement acknowledging your financial failures and crediting my business acumen for the company's salvation. Elaine will donate her jewelry collection to charity publicly." "That's humiliation," Gregory protested. "That's accountability," I corrected. "You've spent years building your reputation on my humiliation. Now you'll rebuild it on your own." "And if we refuse?" Ethan asked. Then I checked my watch. 18 hours. Every loan comes due. You'll lose everything. The house, the cars, the country club membership, all of it. You'll be actually poor, not just playing at it like you accused me of being. "And our marriage," Ethan's voice cracked. I walked to my kitchen counter and picked up a small object, returning to place it on the coffee table between us. My wedding ring caught the afternoon light, diamond glittering one last time. "What marriage?" I asked. "The one where you vowed to honor and protect me, where you laughed while your father called me trash. That marriage ended in Charleston." The silence in my apartment stretched like a taut wire. Gregory's face had gone from white to red, his jaw working as he struggled to form words. Finally, he found his voice and his old cruelty. "You'll always be the girl in the cheap dress," he sneered, standing with what dignity he could muster. "Money doesn't change breeding. You can own our company, but you'll never be one of us." I smiled then, a real smile that seemed to unnerve him more than my anger ever had. I walked to my closet and pulled out the dark green dress, the one from the rehearsal dinner, the one he'd mocked so viciously. I held it up to the light. "This cheap dress?" I asked. "It's vintage Halston, Gregory, worth more than Elaine's entire wardrobe. But you couldn't see that, could you? Just like you couldn't see that the quiet woman at your table controlled your entire future?" I carefully hung the dress back up and turned to face them both. "You're right about one thing. Though, I'll never be one of you. Thank God for that." I picked up my wedding ring from the coffee table, weighing it in my palm one last time. Then I walked to where they sat and placed it directly in front of Ethan. "This ring," I said quietly, "supposedly made me a Donovan, But all it really did was chain me to cowards who laugh while their loved ones are humiliated. Ethan reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Claire, please, I love you. No, I said firmly. You loved the idea of a grateful wife who would tolerate anything to keep the Donovan name. That woman died in Charleston. Gregory stood abruptly, his face purple with rage. We'll fight this. We'll sue. You'll lose, I interrupted calmly. Every document is legal, every transaction above board. You have 16 hours left to decide. Accept my terms, or lose everything. They left without another word, Ethan casting one last desperate look over his shoulder. I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. They've agreed to all terms. Documents will be ready for signing at 8 a.m. tomorrow. I walked back to my window, watching Gregory and Ethan emerge from my building below. Gregory was gesticulating wildly while Ethan stood with slumped shoulders, defeated. They got into Gregory's Mercedes, soon to be my Mercedes, technically, and drove away. The next morning at 8 o'clock sharp, the Donovan family sat across from me in Daniel's conference room. Elaine had been crying. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the puffiness. Gregory's signature shook as he signed away his empire. Ethan couldn't meet my eyes. The divorce papers, I said, sliding another document across to Ethan. Uncontested. I want nothing from you except my freedom. He signed without reading, the pen falling from his fingers when he finished. As they prepared to leave, Elaine finally spoke, her voice bitter. Was any of it real? Did you ever love him? I considered the question. I loved who I thought he was. But that man would have defended his wife. That man doesn't exist. 6 months later, I stood in the CEO's office of what was now Brennan Enterprises, the same office where Gregory had once held court, making deals and destroying lives with equal pleasure. I'd changed everything, the furniture, the art, even the carpet. But I kept his desk, a massive mahogany piece that had intimidated so many. Now it served as my daily reminder that power isn't inherited or married into it's earned and taken. The company thrived under my leadership. I'd cleared the toxic executives, promoted the talented people Gregory had overlooked, and implemented the strategies I'd observed during 3 years of being dismissed as decoration at business dinners. Revenue was up 30%. Gregory now worked in middle management, reporting to a woman he'd once called too emotional for business. Elaine's jewelry had raised $2 million for a women's shelter. Ethan had moved back in with his parents. His own career stalled as everyone in Charleston knew the story of the wife who'd destroyed the Donovans. I kept the green dress in my office closet. Sometimes I'd look at it and remember the woman who'd worn it to that rehearsal dinner hopeful, trying so hard to fit in, believing love could overcome contempt. That woman deserved better. So I became better. My phone rang. Daniel's voice was warm. The Houston property acquisition went through. Congratulations, you're now worth over $100 million. After hanging up, I stood at the window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, another woman was probably sitting at a dinner table, being mocked for her clothes, her background, her audacity to marry above her station. Her husband was probably staying silent, choosing family loyalty over love. I hoped she was taking notes. I hoped she was stronger than she knew. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just success, it's showing those who underestimated you that their entire empire was always built on the foundation of your mercy. And mercy, like wedding rings, can be removed. The girl in the cheap dress had won. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Claire's journey. What would you have done in her situation? Your perspectives mean everything to me, and they help shape the stories I tell. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest person at the table holds all the cards.